With Jujutsu Kaisen coming out later today, I wanted to cover the top SSR and SR characters and memories that you guys should be looking for if you are going to be starting the game today or re-rolling. And joining me today is our resident expert, a longtime friend of mine, Zenrot. How you doing, man?
Good, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, we haven't done a video in a super long time. I was thinking that. It's been a long time.
Quite a lot of Dragon Ball content, and look what happens.
Good times, man. Good times. I just remembered Bardock and all that stuff. So good times. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so as you guys can see, we slapped together a character tier list. We also have one for memories. We're going to explain all these choices, but make sure you do subscribe to Zenrot for further content. As you guys are going to see in today's video, he's super knowledgeable about the game. His channel will be linked down below in the description. So we're going to start off here, and just quick disclaimer. Some of these guys you do need to reroll for, like, as a priority, but you're just gonna, if you care about meta, you're gonna automatically start off with some of them. SR characters are apparently pretty good, as you guys can see. Yuta there is not currently in the game at launch, but he released as a tie-in to the movie, which dropped like right after the game came out. So who knows when he's coming out? He could be extremely soon after, so keep that in mind. And then also we have some other caveats when we talk about the memories too. So you want to get us started here. What is so great about Gojo and why is he the top priority?
Man, what isn't so great about Gojo? So Gojo does a little bit of everything. He's extremely versatile. He has multiple damage types. He also has a self buff, which some characters have. Gojo's happens to be extremely potent. It's a massive increase to his own damage potential. You see that one right there? Increase his own damage by 75%. That's at its base level. You can level skills all the way up to 10 in this game. So if you move that slider over to 10, you see he gets a damage buff that goes up 125 or 100, well, about 125%. And it lasts for multiple turns, so you can stack that on itself twice before launching his ultimate, which is the Curse Technique Reversal Red, which does a ton of damage as well. With that big 250% buff, that's doing 1,000% Jujutsu damage. He's an insane powerhouse. He's also got synergy with the best memories, or I guess in global versions, they're Recollection Bits. Memories is a better name. But because you can see that first skill there is Jujutsu damage. The second one is physical damage. So it allows him to synergize perfectly with the best memories in the game. And he also has his Limitless Curse Technique passive, which means that he will not take damage from enemy attacks because they cannot bypass the Limitless. Does that sound very broken? Because it is. He is on a 7-turn timer because of that, and I know that your immediate thought is that is really bad because he's going to go away at 7 turns, and if he leaves, it counts as him dying. So for mission objectives where it's like clear without a character getting killed, you will fail if Gojo's timer runs out. However, he's so broken and so powerful that he should never get to the point of needing to leave once he's sufficiently built. He's unbelievable in every way that you can make a character in this game. He's extremely broken.
How common is that AoE as well on the ultimate here?
Decently common. It really depends on the character. Like Nobara is another one that we're going to be talking about. Hers is a single target damage one. Yuji is single target. Yuta is AoE. The better ones, the way they try to balance it is usually single target is a higher multiplier, AoE is less. Yeah. But the better ones tend to be AoE, Gojo, Yuta, all that.
Gotcha. So you brought up Yuta. Let's talk about him briefly and what makes him so good and why people... So basically the thing with Yuta is that, like, if he comes out soon, you might want to reroll again, basically, is the point I got, right?
Yeah. So especially if the pity remains unchanged on the global version, which I have no indication that they will make it any better. The pity is quite bad in this game. It is 250 pulls to pity a character. You get 1 point for a single summon or 10 points for a multi-summon. So if you are in a position where the game just came out, because we're getting those tickets to get, Gojo guaranteed, if Yuta releases anytime near launch, he may be a character that you end up investing in for that reason. So Yuta is kind of like Gojo light. He is also extremely strong. He does not have the Limitless that makes him immune to damage, but he also does not have a timer. He also has a mixture of melee and Jujutsu attacks, so he is also able to synergize with those really powerful memories that allow you to do things if you're able to swap your attack type like that. And we'll talk about a little bit later exactly what I mean. He has AoE damage that is not tied to an ultimate, So he has an AoE attack that will hit everyone. It decreases their resistance to crit hit damage, so it increases the crit rate for your team. Essentially, it's like the same thing.
Mhm.
And it also can potentially kill the enemy in one hit if they're like little enemies. So he's a really great wave clearer too, to get you to the boss faster. His skill 3 does a ton of damage. It's a combo attack with Rika. It does a boatload of damage. And then he technically has the highest damage ult in the game for a while. He may get outpaced eventually. Up to the point that I continued playing, he had the highest raw damage ult in the game. Gojo's ends up being stronger because he has that huge self-damage multiplier.
Yeah.
But in terms of raw output, Yuta's is actually higher than Gojo's. So Yuta and Gojo kind of come together to form this gigantic nuke combination. And then Yuta has 2 passives as well that are both really good. So that top one there, the I Won't Let You Die, that is a heal. So if your team's HP gets low, Yuta will expend a little bit of cursed energy to restore all of your allies' HP by 25%. He won't heal himself, so worth noticing, but he will heal everybody else. And it gives him a little bit of ult gauge back as well to do that, so it's kind of like getting a free action. And then the Don't Bully Yuta passive is when an enemy tries to do melee damage to Yuta, there is a % chance that the attack will be blocked and countered by Rika to hit them instead.
Oh man, that's pretty funny. But that sounds pretty awesome. Like he can just fill multiple roles and do a lot of damage, wave clear. Also a little bit of support there with the healing. So he's not here on launch, but he's probably coming out sometime soon afterwards. So keep that in mind for sure. Now back to the next priorities here are 3 other really good characters, but I wanted to make this very clear. So when you start the game, you are going to get guaranteed SSR tickets and you can reroll infinitely until you get the character you're looking for. So Gojo is the priority there, and Nobara seems to be the next character that's the priority there. But we're going to talk about the Yaga next here.
Yeah, so Yaga is actually an SR character. So SR characters are good in this game. Some of them. I mean, not all of them, but
we had an R
the
on
ones
our
that
list.
are good. Yeah, we do have an R on the list. We'll talk about that in a bit too. But so Yaga's kit is all based around his skill number 2. It's called Tutoring. It is a universal buff to both Taijutsu, which is melee attacks, and Jujutsu damage. So he buffs everybody, like universally. It does not matter if you choose to go the meta route and invest in, Gojo, Yuta, because they will get the buffs from him. If you choose to go off meta and just play with the characters that you like, you can still use him because he buffs everyone. Like, the only real way that the buff doesn't help is if you run all support characters, which why would you do that? He does have a sneaky little use on that skill 3. There is a status debuff that you can give enemies in this game that just straight up increases the amount of damage that they receive. This skill does do that. The odds that you're going to do it are pretty limited because if you look at that skill 2 again, you can see that the buff lasts for 4 turns, which means you can actually stack it on itself. So he can use it, give you that buff, use it again on the next turn, and give you a second stack of that buff. So he can just kind of keep stacking it up. And then I'm sure you can put 2 and 2 together. If you remember that Gojo buff that was 250%, and now you're adding this buff in on top of it, you're getting to some crazy multipliers with your damage output. So that skill 2 is really where Yaga shines. His ultimate as well increases the damage received by the enemy and also reduces their damage output. So it's a really good support ultimate. Are you going to use it? Probably not that often, because there's a mechanic in this game called combo ultimate, where if you use an ultimate with 2 characters at the same time, they will do some extra damage and get a little bonus to themselves. So you don't ult with your support characters too often unless you've already ulted with your DPS or you're going to time it like that, But it is a decent ultimate to have just on a character like that. He's the best buffer in the game for a very long time. He will eventually get replaced by better buffers, but even then he is still top tier in the Japanese version, even with those better buffers coming out that are slightly better than him. He will be a mainstay on your team from day 1 to whenever forever, basically.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to hear about, like, an SR character. And he is the type of SR character you were telling me that you actually do want to get him initially in your account because he just makes such a huge difference, right?
Yeah, so some of the SRs that we're going to talk about, like the Nanami, the Momo, they are really good, but they're not world beaters. Yaga's buff is so high. I mean, the level 1 that we looked at was almost 30%. At level 10, it's almost a 50% buff with each stack.
Man.
And, you know, you can stack it multiple times. And the fact that it's universal like that means that no matter what character you ever want to invest in the future, it will always be viable. You'll never be in a position where, oh, you know, I want to use Toji, or I want to use, you know, whoever, another Gojo or Nobara or whatever it is. And now my Yaga doesn't work. That will never happen. He's always valuable. He's always a good investment.
That makes perfect sense. What about Kugisaki here?
So
I see she
Nobara
got buffed as well, huh?
Yeah, I believe so. A few of them did, like the
gotcha.
launch characters, to bring them more in line. So Nobara is kind of the replacement goldfish for Yuta until we get him, essentially. Again, you get her guaranteed with the tickets, so there's no reason not to get her. But she has a mechanic that's very similar to the way that she works in the series, where she uses her nails, and every time you hit an enemy with a nail, they retain those nails, so they stack up, right? So you hit someone with a Nobara skill, and then they have 3 nails. You hit him again, they have 6 nails. And then her ultimate detonates all of those nails. So the more nails that the opponent has, the more damage that Nobara's ultimate will do. It does a decent amount of damage in base, and then she also has a self buff, just like Gojo, that allows her to increase her own Jujutsu damage, and that's the only kind of damage that she does, so it applies to everything that she does. You're gonna save it for her ultimate, but she does have it. And she has a base built into her kit crit rate increase. So she has just a natively higher crit rate than most other characters do. You can see it there. It's increases her own crit rate by 10%. So she is second only to Gojo in damage output. The gap is big. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. The gap is large. But for the launch pool of characters, she is second only to Gojo. And the way that she works in the team is very similar to the way that Yuta will work. So it's easy to just slot her out and slot Yuta in when you get to that point.
Gotcha. And the way I understand it is you typically want to have 2 DPS and 2 support on your teams, right?
Generally, yeah. So support skills actually go off first. So you can, the way that you order your team is from left to right. The character that is in the first position goes first, then the second character, third and fourth. But support skills will activate prior to damaging skills. So skills for people in the back can kind of go first. So you want to order your team based around like the order that you want your skills to go off in. Generally, you have 2 buffers and 2 DPS because of that combo ultimate mechanic, where they just kind of nuke everybody. So you have the 2 buffers that buff up your 2 nukers, and then you unleash their ultimates at the same time and just obliterate the boss's HP, is generally the way that you approach most content. If the content vastly outlevels you, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we get to that Inumaki, you treat it a little bit differently. But that is ultimately the end goal, is to stack up your 2 DPS and then let them go crazy on the boss at the end.
Gotcha. So I think next up on our list was actually Nanami. So let's cover him if I can ever find him in here. I lost him. I guess we'll just do Momo really quick while I look for Nanami.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So Momo is very similar to the Nanami that we're going to look at. She's just another buffer, just like Yaga, and so is Nanami. The difference is that her buff is a lot more limited in application. So hers is a bigger value, but it is a lesser duration. So her buff is at a base rate, it's 40%, goes up to I think about 70%. It's like just under 70%. And then it only lasts for 2 turns or 1 usage. So as soon as you attack, it's gone. So it is still a potent buff, but if you remember, we were talking about Yaga, you can stack Yaga's buff. Nanami is the same way. You can stack Nanami's buff. You cannot stack hers, because your characters would have to avoid attacking, which not everybody can do.
Gotcha. She's also got looks like a AoE stun. That's pretty interesting.
It's a very low chance for a stun. Most stuns tend to sit in significantly higher. She caps at like 85%ish, I want to say. 86, yeah. Which is low. The way that stun works in this game, might as well talk about it now because we'll have to talk about it in a minute anyway, is every time you stun a character, they gain progressively more resistance to being stunned again. So you can't, just stun forever. They don't become immediately immune, but each time they are stunned, the chance that the next stun will hit is significantly lower. and that just kind of stacks up each time you use it. So with a lowish base chance like that, you're probably looking at a couple hits before it wears off. Not enough to really cheese anything with. And most content where you would need to stun is something that you can't nuke. Most content that you can nuke, you will not need to stun. So
Gotcha.
it's there. It's neat. It's not amazing, but it is decent.
Okay, sounds good. Speaking of amazing, let's talk about Nanami and why you didn't choose the SSR one, by the way.
Yeah, so that's interesting that the SR one is better than the SSR one. So the SR Nanami, very similar to Yaga in the way that he works. He is a universal damage buffer. He does, I think, 35% at his peak. So he can stack it twice. That's 70%, you know. He also increases his own damage. So he doesn't do amazing damage, but he is able to do a little bit. Now the SR one, with that buff that stacks with the Yaga buff, again, remember we were talking about stacking that Yaga buff, we're stacking that Gojo buff, we're stacking this buff too. The damage multipliers you're getting are through the roof. You're doing just absurd, over-the-top damage. The SSR Nanami is a DPS. He is not a buffer like this. He does not, have the same support capabilities that this version does. He is a damage dealer. Characters in this game are modeled very heavily after their what they can do in the series. So he is pretty mediocre until his passive kicks in, which is his overtime passive, which starts on turn 9. And it gives him a big stack of ult gauge. It increases his damage output, and it gives him cursed energy. So he becomes just like a stronger DPS. But there are really, really good DPS in this game that do not have that limitation.
Yeah. And also, since you can't use the same character names, you ultimately
That's
wind
exactly
up
where I was going.
SRs.
Yep, is that you're stuck choosing between a DPS that is decent but kind of mediocre in comparison to the rest of the game, or the second best buffer on launch, and you cannot use them at the same time. So it's kind of a no-brainer.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. But yeah, he's getting some pretty interesting buffs here for the SR one.
Yeah, the SR1 buffs, they're very strong. The fact that he increases his own damage is nice because, any little bit helps, because he's going to have to attack sometime. He can't just spam his buff forever because that costs cursed energy. Every skill in this game requires cursed energy to be cast. Sometimes he will have to attack. And he has an ultimate as well that will do, a little bit of damage. But the universal damage buff to your team that can stack multiple times is definitely where he shines.
Gotcha. Okay, well, makes sense. So far we've covered basically the best damage dealers in the game. Yuta, we'll just remove him from the list because he was more of an honorable mention thing. So let's get to the main character of the series, and that is Yuji, of course. So what's the deal with Yuji?
So Yuji is the best physical DPS that we're going to have in the game for a little bit. Damage is split between physical and Jujutsu damage. Yuji is pure physical. Unlike, Nobara or Gojo's mixed, Yomura's pure Jujutsu, Yuji's pure physical. So this is a mechanic I haven't talked about yet, and that is the Black Flash. So characters in this game are capable of using the Black Flash if they have used the Black Flash in the series itself. So Gojo can use it, Nobara can use it, Yuta can use it because he used it in the movie. Yuji's main mechanic revolves around that Black Flash. So his damage output is kind of mediocre. But if you can see that skill 2 there, which is the attentive skill, it buffs his own crit rate by a huge amount, and it also buffs his own Black Flash rate. Black Flash just basically being a stronger critical hit. So it's a critical hit with a higher multiplier on it. And it also increases his own ultimate gauge. So that buff there is a huge buff to his crit rate, a huge buff to his Black Flash rate, and it gives him a lot of ultimate damage. And then you have, or an ultimate charge. And then you have his ultimate, which is a 3-hit attack, which is the ultimate Black Flash, where he does the 3-hit combo that he does on Nanami in the show. Or not Nanami, what's the guy's name? The tree man. On the tree person in the show.
And
I'm
bad
each
at the names.
of those hits, Hanami, that's the one. Hanami.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Not Nanami, Hanami.
I'm so bad at the names, man.
I know, it's crazy. But each of those 3 hits can trigger the Black Flash.
Gotcha.
They do not always, so it's possible to hit all 3. It's possible to hit 0. but each of those 3 hits can trigger the Black Flash. His damage output lags behind both Gojo and Nobara, but he is still decent if you want to use a physical team. So if you want to use like Toto, you want to use physical attackers, Yuji is going to be your best bet for quite a while. He is solid. He also has some weird passives. Because he is Sukuna's vessel, he's immune to or resistant to poison. Not a thing that comes across very often or is super relevant. And then also he has, I don't know if this is unique to him. I don't believe that it actually is. I think this is true for everyone that can do it. But when the Black Flash is performed, it increases the odds of you hitting it again. Because just like in the show where once you hit the Black Flash, you become like in the zone and it's easier to do it again. Every time you hit a Black Flash, you increase your odds of hitting it a second time. And anybody who can Black Flash on any attack that makes physical contact. So all of Yuji's attacks are physical, and so he can Black Flash. Nobara's nails, even though they technically are Jujutsu damage, they count as physical hits because they make physical contact with the opponent's body. Yuta, for example, his sword can Black Flash. So whenever he swings his sword, it can Black Flash. Rika cannot. His beam blast that he does, like where Rika shoots a big beam, that cannot. Rika's counters cannot. So it has to be the character making physical contact with the opponent. And since all of Yuji's kit basically does that, he has the highest rate of really hitting that Black Flash.
So is Black Flash basically just summed up a critical hit damage enhanced attack? Is that pretty much what this is? Because I haven't seen any critical hit damage. It's a stronger
crit, basically.
I'm seeing crit hit resistance, crit hit rate, but I'm not seeing crit hit damage. So that's one of the things that I'm not really seeing. So I wasn't sure about that.
Some characters do buff it. Yuji does not, and a Black Flash and crit, I believe, are treated differently. At least in the sense of, I'm not entirely sure if a crit damage buff would buff the damage for the Black Flash or not. But the easiest way to think about it is as a crit that does more damage than the basic crit multiplier.
Okay, that makes sense because it looks like, just going over his kit here, it looks like his kit is revolving around trying to do critical hits and kind of beat you with that. So interesting style, especially when he's doing the 3 hits here, all that stuff. So interesting play style for this guy in particular. But you did say that like there's a really big gap between what physical characters can do, like solely physical characters, and then characters that are even mixed or Jujutsu based, right?
Yeah, and there's a few reasons for that. The recollection bit availability is a big reason for that, because there's just better ones for Jujutsu characters. Jujutsu characters just do more damage. I mean, Gojo has those crazy buffs. He has the availability to buff himself so much. Eventually, there will be physical characters that are kind of on that level. Toji Zenin comes out, I think, 6-ish months into the game, and he is certainly on that level. But just in terms of their physical versus Jujutsu damage output, physical lags behind for quite a while.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about our resident R-ranked character, Inumaki. What's so good about him?
Yeah, so he is a character that every time I tell somebody that Rs are good in this game, they tell me that can't possibly be true. And they're kind of right. So he does have some neat little abilities, like this protect skill here. Decreases allies' damage received by 40%, fills the allies' ultimate gauge. It takes some of his HP. That's, a decent support ability for what it is. The real appeal to him, though, is that skill number 3. So this is a stun, a 1-turn stun on the enemy. If you look at its chance at level 10, it's a 160% chance. So it's going to hit several times. And if you're lucky with the resistance rolls afterward, it will keep hitting. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to go into content where you are largely overpowered. It's too strong for you. But you can hit these stuns over and over again and give yourself so many free turns that you're essentially able to cheese out bosses that you otherwise could not beat. That's his real appeal, and it works. I've used it myself plenty in the Japanese version to beat one of the bosses we'll talk about a little bit later when we're talking about the memories, but he's really great at boss fights. That's his big appeal there. Eventually, you will be strong enough where you no longer need him. But he allows you to really kind of jumpstart your power progression and get those really good memories from clearing bosses earlier than you probably should be able to.
Gotcha. All right, so there's about, 8 or 9, it looks like SSRs we didn't actually cover from the launch pool. And long story short, I'm sure that some of them have some pretty niche uses, but the general sentiment that I've seen and I've heard from you as well, Zen, is that they're all pretty bunk, right?
Yeah, Toto is the only one that has, some niche use there. I guess Nanami, you could argue, does. Panda is the only tank. He's quite bad. Most of the others are quite bad. Toto is fun if you want to do the best friends and brothers with Yuji, and you feel like playing like that and you don't want to go to the meta. But if you're worried about meta stuff, the launch pool, you're looking at Gojo and Nobara.
Gotcha. So that's pretty straightforward because like we talked about earlier, you're gonna get those tickets. You just grab those two and worry about getting the SR characters around it. You've got basically the best possible account to start here. So that's pretty cool to see. We've now covered all of the characters from our character base list. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Zen, link down below in the description. By the way, we're 26 minutes in. So if you've made it this far, then you obviously are enjoying. So make sure you do those things. We'd appreciate it. Now we're going to talk about the memories. And the first thing I got to say is there's a lot of memories. Apparently they drop these pretty consistently, but don't feel overwhelmed. You don't have to worry about a ton of these, right?
Yeah, so there is a launch pool of them that drops all at once, and then they just kind of come out. They tend to come out 1 or 2 with a new character. They'll get added in. Events usually have a farmable one, but they come at a digestible pace, so it's not something that you need to be super stressed trying to dig through the minutia of each one. And we're going to tell you the best ones when you start the game right now. So
yeah, perfect. So let's go ahead and jump in with the non-standard one. What's so great about that one there?
So non-standard, everyone just kind of refers to it as Hollow Purple. It is a gigantic Jujutsu nuke. Basically the way that memories or recollection bits, I'm just going to keep calling them memories, it's too ingrained in my brain. But the way that these work is that you trigger them when you want their ability to go off, and then they have a cooldown before you can use them again. So they're kind of like an equipable additional skill for your characters. Mm-hmm. What non-standard does is it just adds 80% to your Jujutsu damage. So now you're thinking, okay, we're stacking those Yaga buffs, we're stacking those Nanami buffs, we're stacking those self buffs for Gojo, and then before we ultimate, we're popping this as well for an additional 80% multiplier on top of that. We're talking insane multipliers. Crazy. It's the highest one for Jujutsu nuking damage in the game, barring the next one we're going to talk about with its awkward usage. But that one has to be used by specific characters in the right way, whereas non-standard can be used by any character that does Jujutsu damage.
Awesome. So it's just basically turns your character into more of a nuke. So you're going to slap this on your Gojo, and he's just going to run through everything, basically. So that one is from... So the thing is, too, there's a lot of memories here that are also just flat out just like free to play or from events. And so this next one here, Pride, is apparently one that you get from beating a boss. So talk about this one here.
Right. So Pride is from the boss battle against Jogo. Mm-hmm. Now, this game is very true to Jujutsu Kaisen lore. So Jogo uses his domain expansion in this battle, which will bypass Gojo's Limitless, just like it does in the series. So he's able to damage Gojo. So the fight is quite hard. That's kind of where that Inumaki comes in. So don't expect to pop the game open and get this within your first 2 days, right? You're going to have to work to get here. But what makes it so good is if you look at the way that it's broken down. So your ultimate skill is activated. It increases your Jujutsu damage by 55% for 2 times, not 2 turns. So 2 times means that's 2 uses of the buff. When you attack with Jujutsu damage twice, the buff goes away. But the cooldown there is for 5 turns. So you're able to use it at the beginning of the battle, not attack with Jujutsu damage, only use melee damage with the character that uses this buff. And then after the 5th turn, you're able to pop it again in order to double stack it up to about 110%-ish of a damage buff, as opposed to non-standard, which is just that single use 80. Now, the limitations for this is that not all characters are capable of doing physical and Jujutsu damage. Luckily, our big 2, Gojo and Yuta, are both capable of doing that. So you're able to use this on either one of them. Nobara, for example, cannot. All of her damage is Jujutsu-related damage, so she's not able to use this little trick. So for characters that are able to stack this buff, it becomes the most potent Jujutsu buff in the game. For ones that cannot, it is inferior to non-standard. So it has its ups and downs, and it is rather hard to acquire. but it is your best Jujutsu damage buff in the game in the right circumstances.
Correct. And again, guys, this one is not one that you're getting from the gacha, but we wanted to point it out. So I think the rest of these that we have on our list are all gacha based ones, right?
All of them except for that first one in A tier are gacha based. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're going to talk about the other top S ones here. So we'll go over to Unity from the top to bottom. What's so great about this?
So Unity from top to bottom is a support memory. So memories, just like characters, are divided up into, offense, DPS, support, defense, that kind of thing. This is a support memory, and what it does is it increases the ultimate skill gauge charge of all of your allies. So ultimates almost kind of work like a fighting game. You build a meter over turns, and then once that meter is fully charged, you're able to use your ultimate. There are some characters who are blessed with very potent but very slow ultimates. Now, at release, that's not like a huge deal, but there are ones that will come out after release. A big example is the Chimera Shadow Guard in Megami that will come out in a few months after release. His ultimate is one of the strongest in the game when he first comes out, but it's very hard to get there. And if you can't get there and get him set up before your nukers are ready, then his ultimate has no value. So this allows you to essentially speed run your ultimates. So both it gives you faster clears because your nukers will be ready sooner, but then it also guarantees that somebody like that Megami, who requires several turns of ultimate to really get the value out of him, is ready to go in time to get the full value out of him. So this one is not as good on initial release because, again, it's just speeding up to that inevitable nuke conclusion. But as time goes by and you get characters that have more difficult to use, I guess, ultimates, this will become increasingly more valuable.
Gotcha. All right, what about adult time here?
So adult time is very similar to non-standard. It is just a damage buff. The difference is that this is universal damage. So it is still one hit or one use. So you use it and the next attack you do gets the bonus. Unlike non-standard, is not limited to ultimate attacks. So non-standard only works on ultimates. This also works on something that isn't an ultimate. You're never really going to use it that way, but you can. You can use it on something that's not an ultimate if you want to. And it gives you a slightly weaker buff. It is only 70%, but that is offset by being 70% of either kind of damage. So it's not locked to Jujutsu or physical attacks. It is just your damage output. Whatever you use is getting this buff.
Interesting. I see here that it also increases allies' crit rate as well, so that could be useful.
So that is, if you see there, it says unlocked at LB1. So memories become more powerful when you fuse dupes into them, just like characters do. And they unlock additional aspects to their their ability. So when a critical hit is performed, if you have at least one dupe of this, it increases all of your allies' critical hit rate. Non-standard, for example, if you have one dupe into it, gives you 200 ult gauge at the start of every turn, or every wave. So like when you kill characters and then the next wave of enemies comes in, you get 200 more ult gauge if you have at least 2 copies of this.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing I've noticed as well with going through this with you is that the characters themselves, maybe this changes as you go, they don't have a lot of passives. They kind of just have 1 or 2. So I'm guessing that they're expecting you to make up the difference as well with these here, and then the extra bonuses passes that these can unlock too, right?
Yeah, it's very similar for anybody watching that plays like Honkai Star Rail, where it kind of can sometimes feel like a character's kit is locked behind their light cone, and having that additional kit really makes the character better. It's not as specific in this game as it is in that game, because there are some light cones in that game that are amazing for some characters, bad for others. Non-standard will be good on anyone that uses Jujutsu damage, for example. But yeah, it just kind of buffs, like fluffs out their kit more.
Gotcha. All right, so I wanted to rapid fire the last few that we really kind of highlighted here in particular. But if you wanted to just kind of start off with this one here with Gojo and work our way over. Yeah,
so Gojo's Campfire, or Gojo's Solo Camp, I think is what it's called. It is it's the same thing as Adult Time, but it's a little bit weaker. It's 60% instead of 70. It's free to play, so it's farmable. So that's the main benefit to it. It's just a nice free-to-play alternative that we'll get pretty early on that people should probably have on their radar.
Okay. And what about this one with Yuji?
The Yuji one here, I actually don't remember the name of this one. It is Mutual Trust. So Mutual Trust is one of the best ones at damage negation. So it decreases the damage received by your allies by 30%. So you can see when a boss is about to let off a big nuke, pop that, you take 30% less damage from the big nuke.
Gotcha. And the next one here?
Next one is Like-Minded Sisters. It is the Maki and Mai one. It is exactly the same as non-standard, except it is for physical damage, so it is much worse because physical attackers at this time are much worse.
Yeah, that's pretty unfortunate, but it's nice that there's an alternative, at least if you wanted to do that and you wanted to build more of a physical account, if you wanted to just have fun with it. And the next one, like Cherry Blossomy or whatever is going on here.
Yeah, A Wish from the Past. So this one is the only memory, at least at launch, I don't know if more came in later, that can heal. So if you're having issues, maybe you want to slap it on one of your support characters just so, you know, oh, the fights are getting kind of hard, slap this on your Yaga or whoever you want, and that way you can pop an AoE heal whenever you need it.
It's pretty useful if you happen to need it, but it sounds like this game is like boost damage, nuke. So
pretty much,
you probably don't need that.
Yeah, the way that you lose fights is when you get over leveled by the enemies to such a point that they kill you before you get there.
Yeah, you're just way underpowered, I guess, right? So
yeah.
This last one here, I actually kind of remember you explaining this one to me, so let me see if I can hit it. I don't know the name of this one. Actually, we have it open. It was Memories in a Nook. So the way I remember this one is that it basically just gives aggro to whoever has it. And one thing you can do is you can use this on Gojo at the expense of getting way more damage. So you probably shouldn't do it. But you can combine that aggro with the fact that he has Limitless and can't take damage in pretty much any scenario. And it makes him an invincible tank for however many turns, right?
Correct. So yeah, you pop that on Gojo, you use it, all the enemies will attack him for their next 2 turns, but he cannot take damage. So that's 2 wasted enemy turns. It really, really hurts his damage output, so you probably won't do it once you get to the point where you're starting to nuke stuff. But it is a neat little combination that's kind of less used because Panda is very bad. So you're not really going to use Panda very often. So most people just kind of opt to use a Gojo tank instead if that's the route that you want to go.
If you need that, you just kind of put it on Gojo. That makes a lot of sense. So were there any other ones here that potentially could have been on launch that you wanted to kind of highlight before we kind of just wrap it up?
There's a couple in there that are not on launch, actually. There's the one of the Geto and Gojo, like the teen Geto Gojo laugh in there now, called the Strongest Duo. It's very similar to non-standard, but it's a 60% buff, but it lasts for 2 turns. So you can pop it early and then use it a little bit, like use it on a Jujutsu attack and then follow up with your ultimate if you want to stack damage that way. And then the only other one that really sticks out is the Yuji and Toto laying on the ground there, like on a dirt path, called Nameless Youth. And it is another physical ultimate one. So if you're going to use a physical team, this is a good one to have. It gives you 70% to your physical damage, which is a little bit lower than the Maki one, because the Maki one is at 80, right? But when your health is 50% or less, you get an additional 30% more. So it can go up to 100%. It won't all the time, so it's not quite as good as the Maki one. That's just consistency. But this has the potential to hit higher. So if you're off meta and you want to be a physical boy, then that is a pretty good one to go for.
All right, guys. So we're going to recap really quickly. So when you log in, you're going to have guaranteed SSR tickets. You're going to be, if you're going by meta anyway, as this whole video is kind of based on that, you're going to want to get Gojo. You want to get Nobara here. You definitely want to get these 2 SRs as well, Yaga and Nanami. And then I think that's where you probably would just draw the line. The other characters you can also pick up and use as well. And then for the memories here, there's not really a ton that you're really going to be able to get from jump. You want non-standard, but the way I understand it is that you don't want to go out of your way to reroll for these either, right?
If you have the patience of a saint and you want to make sure that you start with non-standard, more power to you. Yeah. There are much easier to get alternatives that offer a little bit less. Like, that Gojo's Campfire is 60% instead of 80%, but it's farmable, so you'll just get it. There's also SRs that offer, lower damage multipliers, but function in the same way. So if you're willing to use weaker stuff that is still fine, I would not waste your time re-rolling for those. If you are one of those people who wants only the best and you've got to have it, then go ahead and reroll for non-standard. But you're not gonna hurt your account by not doing that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Well, guys, like I said, and it's been shown, Zen knows a ton about the game, so make sure you subscribe to him. The link will be down below in the description, and make sure you subscribe to the channel here because we are going to be producing a ton of content as we figure out how to play this game over the next couple of weeks here. But I want to thank you for joining me, man. It's definitely been a pleasure. Like I said earlier, it's been a really long time, so we're gonna, now that we're both back on like the same game, we're gonna have to figure out a way to kind of make that happen a little bit more in the future.
Oh man, Jujutsu Kaisen races. Just like the old times.
Oh my god. Oh man. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. Take it easy.
Goodbye, everybody.